Hello friends, this is Scott back at the Project Garden. Just got done stopping at the nursery and picking up some summer plants. It's a little early to be planting here still, but the weather forecast does not indicate there's going to be any frost. Mother's Day is this coming Sunday, so we're going to go for it. Today we're going to talk about tomatoes and the best way to plant tomatoes. Now, I'm in Zone 5 in Utah, so it's a pretty cold climate. It's really not safe to plant tomatoes until you know that the danger of the last frost is over. You can get away with planting early if you have like walls of water or little heat caps that you can put on tomatoes or cover them with buckets. But since this is the Project Garden, I don't live at this residence, it's going to be kind of inconvenient for me to run back and forth to try to cover things if it does freeze. So I'm not going to take that chance much with other things, but tomatoes, I'm going to try to plant those today. I bought 10 different varieties to plant at the Project Garden. I'm just going to start filling up the rest of the space that we had room for from the spring crops, and then we'll just keep adding plants as the season progresses. So the nurseries are just now getting a good supply of plants, so it's a good time to get out there and start buying your summer stuff before it's all gone, particularly seeds. If you don't buy the seeds, you're not going to find the seeds, so that's an important thing. So today we're talking about tomatoes, okay? Some people have greenhouses and they can start them in February or March and they can have them come up and be ready to roll. Right now though, it's not a reality for me. I do not own a greenhouse. We do have a greenhouse here on the property, so maybe next year we can tackle that project. But right now, what I'm talking about is the size of plants and what you should be putting in the ground. Now you'll find little 6-packs of tiny little tomatoes. You'll find them this size in a little 4-inch pot, or you'll find them in really big pots. I suggest you do not buy the biggest pot. It seems to make sense that you go out and you buy the biggest and you get the biggest quicker. That's not really the case, because what happens is the root development has to be able to support the top life. So if you go to the nursery and you buy this big old plant and the roots are root bound, it's going to take time for those roots to catch up after being planted, and it'll actually stunt the growth of your tomato. So I think you'll have better luck if you buy a plant of this size and put it in the ground. This one will catch up to a bigger tomato that you put in the ground from a bigger pot, because this one will get the roots established and it doesn't have as much top growth to support, so therefore it's going to grow quicker and a more healthier plant. Okay, tomatoes like even moistured, well-drained soil, fertile soil. They're a heavy feeder. I like to put a little scoop of epsom salt in the bottom of the hole because that's a little bit of a calcium situation that helps with blossom end rot. And blossom end rots when the end of the fruit gets really rotten and brown. That's caused by a calcium deficiency, which is usually caused by infrequent watering, either feast or famine with water. The way you eliminate most calcium issues with tomatoes is once you plant them, you mulch them in, you keep them evenly moist, not soppy, but you always give them a consistent supply of water. And with the moisture retained by the mulch, you generally do not have blossom end rot. Now with most vegetables, I tell you, from pots, is you want to plant at the same depth that is or was grown in the pot. That is not the case with tomatoes. They're an exception to this rule. So what happens is the deeper you plant tomatoes, burying some of the stem, that stem will actually root out and it'll help get that tomato established. So the first thing you do, this is a Parks Whopper improved variety. I just picked it up at Home Depot nursery. So what you want to do is you see all these bottom leaves, you want to pick all these bottom ones off. Just get rid of them, because you're going to plant the soil all the way up to those. Okay, I'm going to leave just a little bit, about this much of the plant. Okay, then all you do with tomatoes, like everything else, is you pop them out of the pot, and as you see, they're pretty root bound. Okay, all I'm going to do is break up those roots. Okay, I want to make sure that this plant, even if I tear a little bit off the bottom, just so that they're not encircling and they can branch out in every direction. And this is ready to plant. And when I put it in the ground, I'm going to bury it all the way to here. Okay, that all this stem is going to root. And that's going to help this plant get established and catch up to any other plants that are put in the ground, and you're going to have great tomatoes. So the first shot is of the cart that I bought lots of veggies today. It's not everything we need for my garden and the Project Garden, but it's enough to get started. I'll run these home, I'll separate them out so that I know what I'm planting at the Project Garden and what I'm planting in my backyard. The varieties we're planting at the Project Garden today include Big Boy, 2 plants, German Queen, Parks Whopper Improved, Big Beef, Pink Brandywine, another German Queen, a Black Cherry, Aroma, and a Celebrity. And today we're also going to put in some green bell peppers, Big Bertha bell peppers, some hot cayenne peppers, a zucchini, and two types of cucumbers. We have a straight 8 and we have an heirloom Boston pickling. As I always do, I always set out the plants to kind of tell where I want to plant them. I line them up, and then I just dig the holes, pull the plants out of the pots, loosen the roots, pick off the lower leaves, and then plant them up the stem a little bit so it'll root. Just pack them in really good so that they're nice and have good soil contact. Quick disclaimer, I forgot the Epsom salt today, so I'll not be using it to be planting the tomatoes. Now, one thing I always like to do with my tomato plants, a great companion plant, is putting these about maybe 1.5 feet from the base of the tomato. These are peppers, any type of peppers, hot peppers, green peppers, sweet peppers. They're a very good compatible plant with tomatoes. So here I am planting the peppers about 1.5 feet away from the base of the tomato plants. Now, peppers do like full sun, but they also like a little bit of shade that the tomatoes will provide for parts of the day as the tomato grows taller. Now, I didn't do as good of a job preparing the soil in this particular area. I just had to use the leftovers that I had from the other parts of the garden. So as you see me digging here, I still have, compost and manure, but I've also got tree roots and miscellaneous other debris in here that's making it a little more difficult to plant. But we'll get them in there and water them in really good here at the end to make sure that they get off to a good start. Now, I wasn't going to plant the other summer vegetables today, but sometimes you get going and you just decide what the heck, we'll go for it. Doesn't look like there's going to be any frost, so hopefully these plants will be okay. So I'm just finishing up the last two, and then I'm going to transition over to some zucchini and cucumbers. So I'm putting the zucchini and 2 cucumber plants over by the onions, and the leeks are on the other end of this row. I'm going to leave some space for some eggplant and possibly some other things. The space in front of me here to the right is going to be where the corn is. So we'll plant that another day. It's a little too early for corn. And then the beans I'll plant behind me in the radish rows so that when the radishes are done, the beans can take over there. But planting these plants is the same way, but these, unlike the tomatoes, I want to plant them at the same level in the soil as they came in the container. Again, I pull them out, I loosen up the roots, I just plant them at the same depth as the container, and we'll water them in here at the end. So here comes the water. We do have automatic sprinklers, but I'm always water everything in by hand just to make sure we get a good soaking and make sure the plants get rooted well. And when they're established, the sprinklers will take adequate care of them. But in the meantime, we got to get everything going. And I'm going to go ahead and hand water the rest of the garden also just to make sure that everything's good and moist. Now let's take a look at our progress of what we accomplished today. Here's the kind of looking pitiful as they're wilted, but they'll perk back up, the tomatoes and the peppers that we planted today. I'm not going to put any cages on yet or stakes. I'm going to try to figure out what I'm going to use at this point. Now here's the zucchini and the 2 cucumbers. And then you see the onions in the background are doing very well. And as I pan back, you can kind of get another look at the brassicas, and then you can see the radishes. There's a really solid green row, the strawberries, and then we pan back around to look at the tomato bed and the pepper bed that we just planted. And there is Mr. Lincoln. He escaped today and went over to the neighbor's house, and I got a phone call from them from his tags that he was visiting. So I had to go retrieve him. These are the tomato cages the homeowner has, the generic kind of weaker metal ones. I'm not sure if I want to use anything like these or if I want to beef them up a little bit. Now a quick transition in my backyard. And I'm going to plant the tomatoes that I separated for my plantings. As you know, I use the backdeed and garden method, and I always stress that you never mix bark into the soil because the nitrogen will all get bound trying to break down that material. So you'll see me, I'm scraping all the bark away, and then I will dig the hole, I'll plant the tomatoes, and then I will pull the bark back over them. You can see with the backdeed method, even after just a year, the soil is moist, it's very rich, there's easy to work, there's lots of soil life, and the sun is not our friend. It's a friend of the plants, but it's not a friend of the soil. Soil needs to be covered with some kind of covering so that it doesn't blow away, doesn't dry out, and all the beneficial animals and insects and worms and everything else need that moisture to stay alive. So I'm just planting these in there, putting my markers so I remember what tomatoes I'm planting. And here's a couple worms, as you see. There's tons of worms in this bed. As I finish planting these tomatoes, I just want to mention the tomato cages that you see here, these green ones. These are the heavy duty. They're pretty expensive. They're probably $35 a piece, I believe, but they last forever and they don't lose their shape. They stack together. I've had these for probably 8 to 9 years, and they're as good today as they were the day that I bought them. So these are the ones I recommend if you're going to use, the cages. The cheap ones you get at the store, they're just disposable. You use them for 1 or 2 years. The wires bend, and then they're just kind of worthless, and they look ugly. To finish the planting process, I just pull the bark back over the plants so they're nice and mulched in. And as always, the final step is watering the new plantings in well so they get established. And to conclude this video, I'm going to show you some pictures of my past gardens, showing kind of the progress that goes along with growing these great vegetables known as tomatoes. Now these are some green Romas. This was from a volunteer tomato plant that was in one of my raised bed containers that just started from seed and produced the most tomatoes that I had on any plant ever, I believe. Now these are some Sun Golds, which are just tasty little cherry tomatoes. These are Juliets. They're wonderful little pear tomatoes. Here's some regular bigger tomatoes. Again, I forget the varieties because I don't usually mark them. But you start getting them, toward the end of July and August, you start finally getting a surplus. And then you start getting more. And then it starts getting cold, and so you pick all your green tomatoes so that you don't lose them. And then you bring them in and put them on the counter. You can wrap them in newspaper, but I just leave them on the counter until they ripen up, and then we usually make salsa or other sauces with them. Now, if you'd like to continue to follow my journey in living my best rural life in the city, please hit like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.